The reason why is because you haven't distributed that content. You need to get more attention on it. You need to get more eyeballs on it. So after you press publish, you need to not just share it on Facebook and Twitter and call it a day. You need to go into a subreddit and answer a question and link it there. You need to go on medium.com and upload it there. You need to ensure that that YouTube video is embedded in a blog post that you wrote 3 weeks ago. You need to take that podcast episode that you recorded and chop it up into 5 different pieces and share those on Twitter. You need to turn those into Instagram stories, a TikTok reel.
Cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you walk and your talk is constant.
Figure we just start out with you know, who was Ross Simmonds? How did you get to where you are right now? Because like you have your foundation marketing company, you got your own like personal brand, if you will. With the public speaking and the conferences and all those other things. So just talk us a little bit about who you are as a human being and how did you get to this point in your life where you're doing marketing?
Yeah, so I'm a small town boy. I'm from a place called Halifax, Nova Scotia, born and raised in a small town called Preston, population of maybe like 200, 500 folks. Grew up there and kind of moved to the big city, which is Halifax, less than 900,000 folks. Been there and still am there like today. So from a young age, I always had a itch for entrepreneurship. Both of my grandfathers ran their own business and always inspired me to kind of have this idea of you can run your own business where you can wake up in the morning, go to bed at night and do somewhat what you want in between, unless your wife or partner tells you to do otherwise. But for the most part, you can do whatever you want, which I always thought was amazing. So I started in high school a do-rag company where I was selling do-rags and selling them out of my locker, and that took off. That was my first taste of entrepreneurship, and I fell in love with the idea. From there, in university, I ran a fantasy football blog, and that opened my eyes to the power of the internet. So I was writing about fantasy sports, creating content in the basement of my parents' house, drinking an instant coffee, like just producing as much content as possible. And I started to get traction on this content where I was reaching people all over the globe. Thousands of people were reading it. Some of the top publishing companies started reaching out to feature my takes on who they should start, who they should bench. And at that moment, I realized like the internet is going to last for a very long time and it can change the life of somebody who lives in a small little place like Nova Scotia to reach the masses. So unfortunately, my marks while I was in university started to dip and my mom told me that I have to shut down my fantasy football blog. So she made me shift it to RossSimmonds.com, where I started to write about marketing, which is my degree. You fast forward a few months later, that degree kind of acted as the launching pad for my career. I got a job at a local ad agency, quit that local ad agency after I learned the game a little bit, started up my own agency along with a handful of different startups, and I've been running my own business ever since, between foundation, hustle and grind, e-commerce sites, cleaning companies, doing angel investing, public speaking, software companies, events companies. I've been just obsessed with building things and seeing how the world responds to it ever since. So today I've also started to create kids. So I've got 3 little ones, and that's also been a lot of fun. So time isn't as freeing as it used to be with the littles, but it's an amazing journey. And my new title of dad has been fun as well.
That's awesome. That's distribution if I ever heard of it, right?
That's it, exactly.
Getting that last name out there.
That's it, cool. Last one, that's it.
So it's kind of interesting. Like, so I've talked to a couple different people like in the marketing sphere, and it's like sometimes they arrive where they are because of frustration, and sometimes it's just like they have this epiphany and they go for it. So like you... like the thing that, you know, I feel like you talk about the most is distribution. So like, did you just like discover the power of that on your own, or was it that you got frustrated that different things weren't working and this finally was a thing, or did you just go like, obviously it's distribution? Like, how did you arrive to that conclusion?
So my heart has always been in storytelling and content. Like I've been obsessed with content in general from a very young age. Like I was in drama, I was obsessed with the dramas, the arts, etc. And then in my like profession, I started to create content. I was working with a lot of the big brands and creating content for them. I had my own personal brand, RossSimmonds.com, and I was pressing publish on content. And I noticed a difference. I noticed that when I pressed publish on pieces of content for these brands that had millions of followers, it would be from me, same concepts, same ideas, same stories, but they would generate tons and tons of engagement. But when I published it on my Facebook account, which only had a few hundred friends and connections, I would get like 2 likes. And at that moment, I really finally realized that the biggest problem and the biggest gap is actually the fact that my sample size and the amount of people that I was reaching on my account was very different from these brand accounts. So I could write a blog post on B2B marketing for a brand, press publish on it, distribute it on that brand's behalf to their audience, and get tons of engagement, tons of traction. Share that on my account. My mom would like it and my buddy Matt would like it, but that was it. And I realized that distribution is the key. Like, you have to distribute your content. I think we've gotten to a point in the industry and across the world in many ways where we've all fallen into the idea that content is important. We get that now. Everybody gets it. We know that content's valuable. We get that content has a role in business, that it can drive leads, it can drive success. We've seen businesses become multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar businesses on the back of content. That's all understood now. But for some reason, a lot of us have forgotten about distribution. And distribution is important because it has never been noisier than ever. It's never been more competitive. There's never been more channels, and there's never been more distractions that people can kind of take their attention and distribute it to. So what we need to do as creators is think about how we can spread our stories on the channels where our audience is spending time if we really need to win. So I would say it came from really a bit of a frustration with the fact that when I was just getting started, I noticed that I wasn't getting a lot of traction on my content, and it was because I didn't have the distribution channels in place. If I take you back into time a little bit, the fantasy football blog that I was running and was reaching thousands of people had distribution built into it because I was distributing it amongst a community where people were already interested in fantasy football. Hindsight's always 2020. When I look back at that, I should have been able to put two and two together, that at that point I had a shortcut to eventually finding my way to a successful fantasy sports career. But instead I went down the path of marketing, but it all worked out at the end.
Right. Yeah. I think you squeezed some lemonade out of that one.
That's it. That's it. Exactly. That's it. 100%.
You know, and I think that's so interesting that you say that. And for the people who are like listening, and for me too, it's like sometimes you're sitting there, especially since like you're so much farther in your career than I am. You sit there and you make content and you put work into it, and you're like, does this totally suck? Or does like nobody care? Or like, how do you even know? And then you sit there and like, you look at someone who's like a big time and you see some of their content and it's like, this is like half-ass content.
Right.
And you're like, and yet everyone's like, oh my God, that's so amazing. Oh wow, that's so insightful. And it's like, screw you, buddy. But then at the same, you know what I mean? But at the same time, like, okay, so what you're like, how do you even know? Like, if your stuff totally sucks or you just don't have enough distribution?
I think
that
it
wasn't
comes
even one of my questions. Like, I'm just like,
no, that's fair. Yeah. I think it starts with an understanding of like your sample size, right? Like if you can say with confidence that 100 people that are your ideal audience saw this piece of content and it still got met with crickets, it's probably not that great. It probably needs some love. It probably needs some work. But if you actually only reach 5 people, 10 people, like the other, like 9 of those people could have had another tab open when they saw your piece of content. 8 of those other people could have just had a baby throw up on them. Like you have to be gentle on yourself and understand the laws of just sample size and how important that plays a role, because a lot of these folks do have millions of followers. And if they are reaching millions of people with one piece of content and 1% of that engages, that's significantly more than you even had as a sample size. So you have to have that context and be thinking about that frequently when you're producing content. And if you truly do believe that your content is better than somebody who is already at a peak and they're already surpassed you, let that be a chip on your shoulder to just be like, all right, I need to show the world that I can win. I need to show the world that I'm better than this person. I need to show the world that I can deliver amazing value, because if you put in the reps consistently, the market is going to reward you. Like, I think the vast majority of brilliance is actually just like left on the sidelines because people get fatigued about the fact that it takes work. Because a lot of people have brilliant ideas, amazing ideas. They press publish on 5 great pieces, and I'm saying they're really great. Some of the listeners probably have done this. And then they're like, nah, nobody engaged with it. Nobody liked it. Nobody's subscribing to my YouTube channel. My podcast is flat. The reason why is because you haven't distributed that content. You need to get more attention on it. You need to get more eyeballs on it. So after you press publish, you need to not just share it on Facebook and Twitter and call it a day. You need to go into a subreddit and answer a question and link it there. You need to go on medium.com and upload it there. You need to ensure that that YouTube video is embedded in a blog post that you wrote 3 weeks ago. You need to take that podcast episode that you recorded and chop it up into 5 different pieces and share those on Twitter. You need to turn those into Instagram stories, a TikTok reel. You need to distribute it across all of these different platforms, go into Facebook groups where you know your audience is spending time, distribute it in those. You have to do all of those different things. But for most of us, we share it on Twitter, we share it on Facebook, and we call it quits. So long story getting a little bit longer, the key is to actually ensure that you're getting people to see your content. And until you can say with confidence that you've reached like 10% of your ideal audience in the world, keep going. Like you should be sharing that piece of content you press publish on 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, instead of just letting it collect us.
That's awesome. And I think that literally dovetails perfectly into the one of my big questions I had for you. Yeah. Because I had this epiphany a while ago, which is, at least this is specifically for Instagram, is that like such a small percentage of your audience who actually follows you, like on purpose, actually see your content. Like I want to say it's like 10% or something like it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was like 10% is what I read. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay. So repurposing content, 100% believe in this. Yeah. That's exactly what you're talking about is, repurposing content. Yeah. How do you feel about just reposting content? So like and you can do shots fired or whatever else. We do that a lot. Like I literally have posts that I have queued up to post like a dozen times before they stop posting, because I was like, at the end of the day, if no one saw it, what difference does it make? How are they going to know they saw it once or twice?
Exactly.
So what do you feel about that as far as like reposting? Because I think that's underutilized too.
My favorite TV show as a kid was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and they played reruns intentionally because reruns are worth watching, right? Like if you are creating content that's good, then you should replay it. You replay content that is good, that your audience might not have seen before, or it's such a good piece of content that they'll want to see it again. Like there's no reason to have shame in the idea of reposting your content. First of all, the algorithms are built against us. So you're not going to reach your entire audience. If you have 500 followers and 10% of them see your post the first time, that's only 50 people who saw it. That means there's 450 other people who didn't see that piece. And if that piece of content could have a positive impact on those other 450 people, where it can change their life, it could change their career, it could change the trajectory of their life, you're actually doing a disservice to your followers by not reposting it. So in my opinion, you have to embrace the reposts. You have to embrace the idea of taking something that you produced a few weeks ago and resharing it a few weeks later. Like, don't be afraid to repackage and repost your content. It's key.
That's awesome. And I think that, like, for me, that was a huge relief, and I'm glad you said that. It makes me not feel crazy. And because I never even thought of from a strategic point, it made sense with just like sheer numbers. But like I had never thought about the idea of reruns on TV because we just don't live in that world anymore.
We don't.
But I don't know how old you are. I'm like 35, and so like I'm like right on the edge of like living in the old world and the new world at the same time.
Right.
And yes, like absolutely, the only way to like actually do a rewatch and not have to wait for it to be on again was recording to the VHS and like watching it again. It's like so crazy, but
that's it.
You're right.
And like today you have that save button on Instagram, like tell people save this or bookmark this, etc. That's the modern day equivalent of the hit record on your VHS, please rewind and be kind. But like, you definitely want to repost your content. I think it's key.
That's awesome. And I think that'd be good. Just like there's that fatigue. Like you're talking about, like it's work, and making content is really hard. And so it's like, man, when you look at like your engagement levels and how many platforms you gotta be on, it's like, dude, do I even have the capacity to make content for all these channels all the time? And then when you're like, okay, like I can repurpose and I can repost, then I feel like that gives people like a little sigh of relief to know that like, okay, like if I put good work into this isn't just a flash in the pan, because like the shelf life of a post on Instagram is pretty dang short when you're spending a whole lot of time on it. It's like you can spend as much time as it will last online. Whereas like a blog post lasts forever. You know what I mean?
It's so true.
Wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters. We know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you're walking your talk is constant.